Welcome back to Curse, Code, and Crown, a live play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition podcast featuring a fully original world and campaign. I am the wizard Cronox, observer of time. Curse, Code, and Crown features our regular voiceover artists and improvisers, Laura Elizabeth as the Orc Count Eta and Princess Gwendolyn, Tyler Hewitt as Makka Deathcap, and Ryan LaPlante as Duncan Danno, alongside our dungeon master, the incredible Tom McGee. So get ready for an adventure including thrills, chills, and hope for a brighter tomorrow. It's time for Curse, Code, and Crown!
As prisoners, you have been brought to Bleen. Now, it is important to remember that Bleen is a series of islands, the islands of Bleen. The consortium kind of grew up around the idea of these islands, and the idea of these islands being at the center of trade and commerce for Gren, and more importantly, the facilitators of trade and commerce for Gren, being well situated in sort of the center of the planet and having easy water access to all of the major continents. Bleen grew in prominence quite considerably as the nations of the world began to interact with each other. The central island is the capital, and most of the island now has been consumed by Sour, the imported city. And it is here that you find yourselves arriving by fancy-ass gondola, having spent a couple days endearing yourselves to the rank and file soldiers who were guarding you and embarrassing the hard partying ambassador Ginkgo Longleaf. As you approach the city, Gwendolyn and Duncan, and I guess Ida as well to some extent, you were struck by the verticality of some of these structures. They're not, certainly not skyscraper level, but for Gren, it's not far off. They're probably sort of 12-story buildings. There are a couple of sort of massive, larger ones towards the center of the island. But there's a lot of city as you approach. You also are struck by just the amount of water traffic. As I mentioned, there were sort of gondoliers and ferry people waiting to take people across. The closer you get, it's like a swarm. There are just boats coming and going. Of all shapes and sizes, but incredibly crowded ports. There are seemingly docks all the way along the coast of of Sour Island, but much like if you've ever seen, there was a situation a little while ago in China where too many cargo ships arrived, so they're just like layers deep of boats. It's that, but with sort of smaller water taxis. So you get as close as you can because of the diplomatic credentials of Ginkgo. People start to move out of the way, but there does come a point where you actually just need to walk across some boats to make it to shore. So although this feels relatively disruptive to the three of you, not so much to Makka because he is aware of even distantly of how things work in Sour and in the consortium of Bleen in general. No one notices. Everyone just moves out of the way. It's a little bit like how someone from North America traveling to India, for instance, or some parts of China would be just struck by how many people there are and how many, like small vehicles are driving around, everything else. Whereas the local populace is like, this is just what walking down a street is like. You just dodge out of the way of these various vehicles and do your best. And similarly here, the turtles manning these boats are immediately moving to counterbalance you. They're not stopping their tasks. It's literally just like as they see you coming, they just take one step in whatever direction they need to in order to stabilize the boats. And it's a remarkably easy transition from ship to land. Is there anything any of you would want to keep an eye out for? Probably not to use your advantage, but just kind of as a general knowledge piece or anything else. Duncan, you've studied a lot of other cultures, but you studied the dwarves more than the turtles of Bleen. Is there anything you'd be looking for, do you think?
I think he'd just be looking for any signifiers that say what they think is important, because I think that's the thing he's always wondering in terms of negotiation, which is like, if there are statues, what are the statues of? Are there certain recurring like images or logos? What's the currency if he can spot it? Like, is there a rule to the way they lay out buildings? Like, just the things that would try to give him a better cultural understanding of them as a society.
Sure. And how about you, Gwendolyn?
I think Gwendolyn is keeping an eye out for anything that is kind of suggests like what she has learned about Blean courts, because she does have some knowledge. Obviously, no practical knowledge of Blean court, but basically, like from what she has learned.
About those turtle fuckers, as your father was fond of saying.
About those turtle fuckers, yeah. If there's anything she recognizes, to kind of find some footing in basically what she knows about general court lifestyle.
Okay, cool. And Makka, is there anything you're on the watch for? I think it's been, even in your prior life, I don't think you lived in Sour. It's the big city, and it doesn't really seem like a Makka-friendly place. But yeah, is there anything you're looking for?
Trying to get a sense of saturation of the population for this sickness. How many people are sick? How severe do the symptoms appear to be? That kind of thing.
Okay.
Oh, and I mean, it's worth flagging. Duncan is always low-key keeping track of military strength, but I think he has to do that less now that he's been freed from his oath to Orville in particular, and the crown. He's there to right wrongs, but it's not the same as like, oh, I need a way out for Gwendolyn at all times, which is probably a bit jarring for him, but he's embracing it. Okay.
So yeah, you mentioned he's embracing it. So even though... So he's free from the oath, but I think still feels a good degree of...
Oh, yeah. It's not like, he'd abandon her.
No, I understand.
His only priority isn't her safety.
Yeah. Yeah, keep an eye on how that develops, because there's something really interesting to the idea of like, I'm no longer beholden to protecting you. I'm still going to do it, but you think about it in a different way. If it's like, I got to get my friend out of a scrape, rather than I must protect the queen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So as you make your way across the boats, you step foot on the shore, and Gwendolyn, to some extent, you definitely get like a strong sense of Orville to some extent from this place, in that there's tremendous wealth that has been applied and on display immediately. Like when your foot hits the ground, it's like meticulously well placed stonework. There's clearly been a lot of investment in infrastructure to make this place fancy and shiny. The city itself, Gwendolyn, you would know from your research, is known as the Imported City. Largely because and as soon as you sort of set foot on it, you can understand why. There is an architecture that is very clearly tortle. It's built in kind of largely wood, as you would expect in kind of a swampy island nation. You can think kind of a bit of the design you'd see in sort of feudal Japan, where the major concern was we get hit by tsunamis and earthquakes so much that we can't afford to build incredibly solid structures. They have to be wood. They have to be able to move. They have to be able to absorb the environment they're in. And I think for a visual representation, they certainly don't have the sort of curved roofs you would see in feudal Japan. Think of it instead almost as an architectural sketch. So where normally you would like erase the lines, that there's just kind of clearly like logs and pieces of wood placed in such a way that if you were to just try and draw a structure in loose lines in the margin of a notebook, it kind of has that vibe.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That said, that all starts about 2 stories off the ground. And you realize very quickly why it's called the Imported City, because there are buildings from all around Gren at ground level. You can see that they have literally imported and implemented facades, structures. I mean, we're all based near Toronto. Toronto does this all the time with heritage buildings. where a builder, like a condo developer, can't knock the building over, but they can gut it and put a new building through it. So you get a sense of that. So on the street, it is almost like what we in kind of the real world would imagine to be almost like a World's Fair or like an expo, where it's just like all of these different architectural styles and structures and materials are on display right next to each other. It makes for a real, like, it's a small world after all mishmash of buildings. And yet, once you kind of reach the top of what they've imported, there is very clearly a style that the Turtles build, but they're wrapping it, at least at ground level, where you can kind of see it in the cultures of the world.
Anything from Orville?
Notably, no. There is nothing here from Orville, which would seem strange to Gwendolyn pre everything she's learned to this point. But now that you've kind of come to realize that Orville is almost a pariah state, it tracks that there's not Orwellian stuff around here. Duncan, in terms of you, so the statues, there are certainly statues. They're a little more stylized than literal. But again, everything about this place bleeds wealth, and the pursuit of wealth and the application of wealth. So rather than military heroes or anything of that sort, it's clearly the merchant class is king, which makes sense given the sort of trade nature of the nation. But yes, it's a lot of like turtles in fine robes. You can think almost a bit of an impressionistic vibe to them. So they're not like, this is what the turtle looks like, but it clearly evoking wealth and success. You also see a good degree of what a lot of the like disgraceful Chris Columbus statues look like. There's a lot of explorer type statues as a nation that has spent a lot of its history exploring the world to set up these trade routes. There's clearly a reverence for sort of masters of the sea and navigators and that sort of thing. In terms of military presence, a lot more of these sort of snapping turtle motherfuckers kicking around. Again, not a huge surprise given the amount of trade that the consortium does, that they would need.
A weird question, Tom. Are they physically different than the other turtles we see on the street? Like, does this look like a physical caste system, or is this just you bulk up so you look more snappy?
It's just bulky turtles. Cool. You see, there's a wide variety. It's definitely not a genetic caste system by any stretch. It's just, which turtles really like to get swole. You can see though, like there's obviously based on even just the different shells you've seen, there are different inherent advantages to the physiology of certain turtles for this line of work. There are some people who seem to be kind of naturally just by
beefier.
Well, yeah, just by virtue of their physiology. It's like when I was in high school, being a tall, lanky kid, everyone was like, "Oh man, I bet you're really good at basketball." And I'm like, I mean, I'm tall, but I can't run, jump, or shoot accurately. So, nope.
If I were, this would be an advantage.
100%. Yeah. So there's like some of the snapping turtle type folks who like the spiked shells. Like clearly that gives them a bit of a combat advantage. But similar to me being complete shit at basketball, there's just a lot of people who've just put in the time and the training. So no, there's and as you'd expect, just all sorts of turtles, sort of all shapes and sizes. But you can definitely see a lot of these sort of hired guards. Seems to be a fairly standard site. Doesn't look like it's not one mercenary company that services everyone. If you were to venture a guess, you're likely dealing with, like, there is a presidentia of the consortium, but
or there was,
yeah. But you get the sense from kind of your dealings that it's almost like a merchant king, like a merchant lord society, where it's like if every merchant has a bunch of these people on staff and war were to come to Bleen, they would just form an army out of all of their guards. And
so it's probably not a traditional democracy, but it looks like a meritocracy mixed with capitalism kind of thing.
Oh, 100%. There is no, like, the names are clearly misused in that way that Joe speaking, dictators and usually corporations love doing, where it's like, like corporate fun officer. And it's like they're actually just there to make sure that everyone's like doing their jobs, or they get fired.
Carry a gun.
Yeah, exactly. And so yes, doesn't feel particularly democratic. Definitely feels like a meritocracy, and the place is bleeding capitalism. Like, from top to tail, you are just seeing signs of that. And I think, Duncan, particularly given that bent, you can see large. They're roughly factory-sized buildings. You don't know what they're for, but like they're clearly not for living or for, they're not residential. They're clearly something, and given the amount of trade, like warehouses, distribution centers, like all that shit. So
ceramics, who knows?
The whole place feels very, we built a city on top of our workshop space. It all feels very functional as well. As you felt from walking across the boats, like it seems that all the citizens you're observing are fully aware of like the function of the place they live. No one is, surprised by the capitalist undertones.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler, cool. you had a quiet chuckle. You got something for us?
No, just I for some reason in just a split second, I was so sure you were going to say that they built this city on rock and roll.
Oh man!
I was like, why would he say that? And like in my own brain, I was like, no, of course that's not something he was about to say. Why would you even think that?
I mean, I do love that song, but sadly, no, they did not. He's
referenced rock and roll many times in many shows. Not this moment, but it would not have been completely out of character.
100%. This is very much in my wheelhouse. Cool. So that's what you're seeing. Duncan, you did clock earlier that Ginkgo referred to Bleen bucks. It seems just dumb enough to probably be true.
Yeah, I don't think Ginkgo's smart enough to make that kind of joke, so it just feels real.
It also, just the casual way in which he rattled it off, like this wouldn't be a reference Duncan would have, but for us, like there's a real 80s guy from Futurama vibe to this place, where it just is like, there's just that sense of like business everywhere. So the idea that it would have become a snarky casual, it's like, it's still, every time I hear it in something, it was clearly like an 80s idiom of like Boku bucks. And every time I hear it, I'm like, stop, that's such a fucking dumb, why?
Yeah.
But it's that. It's rolled off so casually that it's like whatever the actual currency is called, it's clearly just going by this weird cavalier term now. That I fucking hate, but is true of Bleen.
That you hate, but you also wrote.
I know, because it's true of Bleen.
Every time you say it, by the way, I just picture it as being said by Dwight Schrute. It'd be like,
Schrute bucks.
Schrute bucks. It'd be one Schrute buck.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what's the exchange rate of Schrute bucks to dollars? It's not important.
So hypothetically, I could cash in this many and have $10,000. All right. And then Makka. And sorry, Gwendolyn, just before we get off the capitalist bent, you can tell why your father would have been so snarky about Bleen, because this is exactly like, nothing's going to give Orville an inferiority complex faster than a place like this. This is such a, even though it's political structure and everything else isn't something that Orville would aspire to, this like flagrant show of wealth and pageantry is right up there. But it's a little bit of the way that, and this has certainly been said of Toronto, North American cities are often viewed as like tryhards when it comes to like history compared to a lot of the old European cities, where it's just like there's an effortless historical cool to like Paris that you just can't get here. No matter how hard people try. They're like, oh no, look, this building's really old, and it's like, sure. And there's just that like, no, us too, like look at all our cool shit. And immediately you're getting that sense that, oh, this is like Orville is someone trying to present that. This is someone who just is that, because they have been for a lot longer than Orville has existed.
I think there's also like there's definitely that like feeling of superiority when they would interact with the turtles. That's just like, well, these like slow talking like weirdos, weird animals, and then knowing that this also that they're also like so much cooler and better.
Well, and admittedly, you only met them when the delegation arrived. Like that was the first time
Yeah.
a delegation from Bleen had ever come to Orville since the foundation by Amala. So, like, yeah, there's a lot happening. But admittedly, Gwendolyn's mind has already been open to a lot of this stuff, so it's not like this is coming as a shock. It's just further confirmation of like, oh man, Orville read the foreword to a book and then just thought that was the book and told everyone that they'd read it and built a whole society on it. Turns out there was a book and it's much different.
Yeah.
And Makka, can you roll? I think I'd give you medicine or nature for your observation of the sickness, for getting up and getting down with the sickness, as it were.
I'll happily take a medicine check.
Great.
Build this roll on rock and roll.
That's an 18.
Yeah, man, that's great. So it has you are immediately struck. Well, the others are dealing with the nature of Sour and of Bleen itself. You can skip all that because you are aware of it, and it's not somewhere you've been in a long time. It's, I think, the way a lot of people who, like, I don't know, live in like a smaller town in the Midwest are aware of like a New York or a Chicago, but it's a much different thing like walking into it. That said, it has changed significantly since you were last here. You're immediately struck by the fact that everyone is sick. Every turtle you see seems to be affected in varying degrees. Not everyone is as like much of a snot monster as ginkgo, but everyone does seem to be affected by this in some way or another, whether it's kind of red eyes. You're seeing a lot of that kind of like sort of a tear, like the multiple tear, like you've cried through mascara kind of discharge.
The stain
Yeah. And like people are like, there are some people also who are actively wiping it away constantly, just rubbing at their eyes. You're seeing a lot of like handkerchiefs being kind of like wiped across turtle snouts. But you also see, actually, can you roll me a perception check?
12.
Okay. You're seeing the city is a lot messier than you remember it being. There seems to be, like, if you kind of think of a city street after a parade, just kind of like a lot of trash that has been kind of moved into heaps along the sides of buildings. And you notice that there are kind of like piles of it almost looks like leaves and debris and that sort of thing, and these sort of like lumpy piles fairly frequently throughout. You also feel a little disoriented because the spores, for lack of a better term, almost feel like they're tilting a bit. Your kind of spore equilibrium is off. You're not sure whether that's just by nature of how much sickness is around you, or what. But the curse that you've kind of feared may have come to fruition is definitely living large here. So there's some disruption to the cluster, and it's not like you're cut off. It's not like you can't feel other organic beings. It just your balance is a bit off, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So the four of you are marched through the streets of Sour before arriving at a large facility that Makka, you recognize as one of the relatively few readjustment centers in Sour. These sort of jails and prisons are present elsewhere. There's an entire island that is just kind of dedicated to this and rehabilitation of criminals. But of course, as with any major metropolis, Sour came to require at least a temporary holding facility for criminals awaiting trial. This building seems like it is much more turtle architecture than a lot of what you've seen to this point. That kind of architectural drawing style is very present. That said, it does have a series of 5 columns that are very clearly elven by design. They're beautifully embellished. Remind you a bit of some of the older architecture you saw in the Shadowlands from before the pact was made. But unlike a lot of the other buildings, they've just kind of stuck these pillars there to be like, look, we bought these. But beyond it, it is very clearly a Tortle building for Tortle affairs. Once you arrive, a number of Tortles in uniform come out. They're wearing, for lack of better analogy, kind of Doctor Doom chains. So they've kind of got shoulder guards and then kind of large brass sort of circular sigils, and then just a series of chains kind of hanging loose over their chest. As with Makka, most Tortles are pretty armored themselves, so there's no real need to suit up. But they definitely look. The prison guards have their own look and their own sort of uniformed approach. And you were greeted by the warden, an actually a fairly small Tortle by the standards you've seen to date. Almost thin, which is a strange fucking look for a Tortle. The shell hangs is a bit oversized compared to the slight frame. That said, he carries himself with that sort of reassured, solid step that evokes authority despite being small. If that makes any sense. He wears the same sort of pauldrons with the chain, though his is in silver and has a large red medallion of office kind of hanging from it, as well as a sort of a military style cap. And he comes out and says, yes, welcome, new prisoners. I hope your trip here was uneventful. Yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Duncan Danno, first captain of the Dawnbreakers. This is Gwendolyn Solaris, rightful princess of Orville. We have Ita of the Empire of Numbers, and last, Makka Deathcap of the Tortles.
Yes, Makka Deathcap. You would seem to be at the very heart of the situation. Yes?
What is the situation that you speak of?
And Ginkgo steps forward, just full William Atherton from Die Hard, just like shoves a guard aside and is like,
This Tortle pretended to be me and ruined my chances at the orgy room in Sprongbreak.
And immediately one of the prison guards steps forward, picks him up, and just walks away with him. He's like, no, okay. But the orgy room, and he gets like carried away and placed sort of at distance. And Warden Oakline sort of shakes his head and he says, I apologize about Ambassador Longleaf. The dwarves of Sprongbreak Fortress are a lot, and it takes a very certain kind of person to succeed there. Yes.
Yes, that's what we've experienced ourselves.
Very good. He is our most exhausting member of government. I apologize. There are some who would say being transported by him is a form of prisoner punishment and cruelty. I assure you, your stay here will be much more pleasant.
Well, and Gwendolyn just has to pipe out. She says, well, I assume so, considering we must have some sort of diplomatic immunity, because I am the rightful heir of Orville and like the throne and stuff. No?
Yes, the throne and stuff. It is surprising to learn that the rightful princess of Orville is here, let alone to see one of your kind. He says as politely as he can, but like in the way that anyone like stumbling over like racist or otherwise like outdated language stumbles over it, just being like, I'm doing my best, but it's still bad. Like he's actively not trying to offend you, but is also being
Is
offensive.
he referring to her as a statue or Duncan as a human?
Duncan is a human.
Got it.
Yeah, he's trying to dance around that badly. Weirdly, like Gwendolyn, he kind of doesn't care because she's in armor. It's easier to just be like, yes. So, like, I mean, as you know, anyone in armor just looks like someone in armor. Like you can't tell anything else about them. But to be confronted with a human is strange for him. But he says, rest assured, Your Majesty, these things will be taken into consideration. You need not remain in a cell with the traitor Makka Deathcap. I will be taking you to the presidential palace along with Ita, was it, of the Empire of Numbers.
Well, all right. I mean, that's great and all, but like, surely you have like guards that you can like post. We can bring like Makka with us because like I've been traveling with him and he's like, well, I should probably stop saying too much, but you know, like surely in the presidential palace there's like security, so it wouldn't be dangerous to bring Makka. I want Makka with me. And
for the first time, you see kind of a like it's hard to read total expressions because you've only hung out with Makka and he's so deadpan. But you see a bit of a supercilious smirk on Oakline, who takes sort of a moment to consider and then looks back up and says, perhaps I have been unclear in my attempts to reassure you about the nature of your stay here. Your Majesty, what you want matters very little right now, yes? I do not know if the concept of hostages is familiar to you, but given that your people stole our Presidentia and Honor Guard with the assistance of the betrayer, Makka Deathcap, you are not in a particularly good position to be making demands.
Oh,
yes?
no. See, that wasn't us. See, no. See, like a bunch of people got, like my people got killed. That was like people from like elsewhere.
He nods to a guard and they cast silence on you.
And
your mouth is moving. In your armor, your voice is still going strong. You know, if there's anything you learned from Karen, it's like this. But the nothing is coming out. So it's literally like someone unplugged the mic.
Yeah, I think Duncan will give a polite nod of his head and say, "We look forward to clarifying the situation at your pleasure."
Excellent. So yeah, there's no check. It just happens. Great. So the guards divide the party because I hate myself. Gwendolyn and Ita, you are to be taken to the presidential palace to meet with Vice Presidentia Cleon Rootback. Ida is receiving incredibly preferential treatment, you've noticed to this point, where Gwendolyn, you've clearly been implicated in something that you have nothing to do with. Ida, as a representative of the Empire of Numbers, is being treated legitimately well. You're being treated polite, like, yeah, send all your kids to live at my castle. What could go wrong? But like, if anything goes wrong, I'm pretty stabby. Whereas Duncan and Makka, Duncan having sort of identified yourself as a co-conspirator with Makka on the way over, you are taken inside to a cell. Essentially, Oakline informs you that your legal representation will be along shortly, that you will, of course, have a day in court to have the charges read against you, and you will have a chance to defend yourselves. This isn't again, in the way that only dictators truly do. There is a lot of pomp and circumstance around the system being incredibly fair and not wanting to take advantage of anyone. Wink. But you will have a chance to plead your case, and you will not be without representation of some sort.
Just to be clear, Tom, do I have my hat?
You do.
Cool.
They're
And
going
I
to
got my
take your weapons from you.
Yeah,
shortly.
obviously the weapons and backpack and shit all go. I just didn't know if I'd still have my hat or my coppers, because those would be the only two things that he actually gives a shit about.
You can think of jail in Bleen kind of like what the photos of jail in Sweden look like. Like it's remarkably humane and well appointed, and you're allowed anything that doesn't seem dangerous. They let you keep. So in your case, yeah, if you want to keep the hat, they would search the hat. Is there stuff in the hat, or are you just asking for flair and swashing reasons?
Flair, swashing, and just Ryan keeping track of it in his head reasons. Just because like there's a certain amount of like Duncan being stripped down that would react with a different Duncan than a clothed, well-treated Duncan.
Yes. No, they're being incredibly reasonable. Duncan, you also like you're happy that they're not treating you guys like complete assholes. On the other hand, this is some proper blue collar shit, like blue collar crime shit, where it's like, or white collar crime, white collar crime shit, where it's like, oh, you defrauded a bunch of people and they all lost their homes. Go like hang out in a park that's called a jail for like a week, and then you can go back to doing it some more. There's very much a sense of any one of us could end up here one day, and we want to make sure it's nice in case we do. But before you're sort of whisked away to your individual things, you do have a moment to confer. But the situation again, as Oakline has explained it, Gwendolyn, Ida is being treated as like a guest, a visiting emissary of state, so is being given full kind of ambassador treatment. Gwendolyn, you're being treated as an official guest, but also are clearly a hostage.
Awesome.
So it's like you'll be treated well. You'll be taken to the presidential palace. Everyone will wait hand and foot on you, but you can't leave or we'll kill you. Duncan and Makka will be heading to the readjustment center to await their legal representation and sentencing. Well, not sentencing, but I guess the case being read against
the trial.
But you have a moment to confer. Also, you will be able to communicate with each other at distance. It just won't be entirely at your leisure. You'll have to be like, I would like to send a note, and then how long it takes will be up to my dice. But they're not like completely cutting you off. Is there anything you would like to discuss?
Well, Gwendolyn, right now it seems like the greater focus is convincing this nation that I guess the nation of Orville did not actually kill their president and disappear and do a bunch of traitorous bullshit, which is sort of national and kind of falls on your shoulders. It sounds like we're not actually getting charged for the orgy room, but we're actually being charged for betraying the nation, which is a problem. I might be able to bounce back to orgy room shenanigans. Makka's in some shite, so I'm going to try to stay with him.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing would be basically a death sentence in Orville.
Based on what we've seen of their presence, I'm not really sure how the sentencing works. We'll have to find out. But if you could clean up your relationship with them so that you can become more of a friend and less of a hostage, that might get you the ability to get some leverage to try to help out Makka.
All right. I think, I mean, sure.
Also, and he just like pulls Gwen a little bit away. He's like, you know how Makka never really talks about the nation of Bleen and sort of doesn't give a shite about them? Leave that out. He doesn't need to be like a hardcore patriot, but he should probably, in your eyes, be a great representative of a country he loves.
Oh, all right. Oh, sure. Okay.
Just don't make it sound like he doesn't give a shit about the nation and he's just going around on adventures with us. Right. That'll sound really bad if they're worried he's a traitor.
All right. He's with us because he's patriotic.
He wants to fix the cycle so he can heal all the turtles.
Right. Fix the cycle, heal all the turtles.
Makka, really do you contribute to this? Because sorry, Ryan, when you said you pulled her away, was it from the warden and the guards or from Makka?
Both, because he thinks Makka would not give productive feedback in this conversation of his own legal defense. So,
excellent.
Right.
Bold question for Laura and Tyler. Ida and Makka being left alone for a second. Is there anything you would say to each other before
I think Ida would just say, it's like, I was not aware that you were treasonous. Is this true?
Not to my knowledge, although I may have committed treason on accident. I will have to wait to hear them explain just how I committed this crime.
That is reasonable.
If I remember your situation correctly, Ita, you may be looking forward to a similar reception from the Empire of Numbers.
That is entirely possible. There are just so many unknowns at the moment. I do not know. I mean, perhaps some here are involved in the conspiracy. I have no idea how far-reaching it is.
Perhaps whether or not I am executed will help you understand what to expect from your own countrymen. Yes.
Perhaps. I would have to study the legal system here. I do not know that they are comparable. I mean, emotionally, from what I understand, that makes sense. Rationally, I do not know.
Duncan will have turned around and gone back to join them because he didn't have that much to say to Gwendolyn.
Yeah.
Ita, there is one thing that I'm wondering about, because you were able to keep track of who betrayed who at what point, because you know the lay of the land. Was Ginkgo Longleaf part of the conspiracy involving the Empire of Numbers? That may have bearing on our case.
Was? That is an excellent question. Let me think back to the notes that I made for myself.
Have I been stripped of my equipment and belongings?
They will be as soon as you're done chatting. Yeah. Before you like, it's a standard prison intake.
I present the small box of documents that the dwarven guy, just the laundry list of like conspiracy letters and correspondence back and forth to like overthrow the government of Sprongbreck and install the minister of the treasury or whatever he was as like the new president.
Mm-hmm.
Just that whole correspondence and letters and stuff like that, with like the letter writing out like what to do when Ginkgo Longleaf arrives and stuff like that. Be like,
perhaps this is the material.
All right, this is a
reference.
weird. Oh, that's really good, but this is a weird question.
And he looks to like Gwendolyn and Ida and Makka, and Duncan's just like,
Now, if we have key evidence, but there is a conspiracy, we don't know who's involved, do we think it is more likely to be destroyed in storage at the prison, or if it goes to the presidential palace with you?
Perhaps I believe it must go to presidential palace, because here you have no rights whatsoever, it seems.
All right, well, Ita, you're not really a hostage or any sort of hostile party, so why don't you take this? Because you're most likely to be able to keep it. That'd be great.
And let us hope that I am not murdered.
I'm going to hope for that, but I'm also going to hope that you could perhaps put some research into these papers and, shall we say, run the numbers and see what you can find.
Of course. I mean, assuming I am not first killed.
All right, so we've got some clear goals here.
I don't. Yes.
Ita, you do the research. Gwendolyn, if you could do your best to make sure that Ita isn't murdered, that would be great.
I mean, she seems to be treated better than I am, so I mean, I'll do what I can, but
that's great, because she's a lot more fragile than you as a giant hulking suit of armor.
All right, sure. Yeah.
So with that, you are separated. Sure enough, Gwendolyn, you have kind of a hand on each arm as you're taken away, whereas Ida is allowed to walk free.
With her stack of papers now.
Well, yeah. So Ida quickly pockets the pockets the documents. There is you see the warden's eyes narrow at this, but as soon as like it just happens to, I think Duncan, like, you've seen enough of this bullshit, / you also watched Lethal Weapon 2. So you know that just like diplomatic immunity is really going to get you far. So you just immediately shove it into her hands and kind of like step back. It's one of those things where the jurisdiction just changed in a drastic way. And you watch like Oakline just kind of be like, curse my total speed. Because now that Ida's got it, he has to just politely let it go, even though it's fucking killing him. But with that, you're separated. Ida and Gwendolyn, you are taken towards the presidential palace, which is very much kind of a large, circular, very ornate. Like if anything looked Orwellian in this place, it's this. It's not Orwellian, but it's you recognize a flex when you see it in terms of architecture. And it seems to be adorned with kind of things from every culture you've seen up to this point. It is very ostentatious and unnecessary, but here we are. Meanwhile, yes, Makka and Duncan, in terms of your gear, you're allowed kind of creature comforts. So if it's something like your coppers or your hat, they'd leave that with you. Makka, obviously, like the netting you've got on your shell, as long as they would take anything that looks useful from that. But I believe you're pretty stripped down, right? Like just kind of.
Yeah, like in terms of clothing, I'm not wearing any clothing. But I'm assuming some of my magical items are gone. The key of locking, the gift of Gus.
Yeah, and to be clear, there are you're seeing them put these in a very secure, safe location, but they're also doing a lot of work to like label it. Again, you're reaping the full benefits of a system designed to punish, but also not punish too hard in case you get punished by it. So it's, you're reassured by the staff that you will receive your gear again if you're acquitted.
Yeah.
Or
So
if
this is if Wall Street CEOs built the white collar prison.
this is 100% that. And in many cases, I think they did. Oh, it's a private prison?
Just so you know, Ida still has Gus's collar.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
should adjust that.
Great.
But I'm assuming like my mace and my shield are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a sort of a magical expert who cast silence earlier. Take a look at your arm. They're going to roll an Arcana check. This is clearly beyond their expertise. It's identified as being a root folk arm, but prosthetics from the root folk don't exist as they understand it. So they're kind of, it's one of those weird things where they're like, okay, well, like I know what this is. Like this is a root folks person's arm, but it's attached to you. And it's,
I don't think Makka's explanation helps them at all when he just like honestly is like,
This is the result of using the cluster to percolate the group consciousness of decades of trauma from the root folk perpetrated by a witch.
he keeps going.
yeah.
Seeing their
is the
confusion,
body
can Duncan give an answer?
Librarian.
Well, so I rolled a 2. Ryan, I'll let you know what the response is, and then you can decide whether you want to chime in with the answer. The magical expert is nodding knowingly along, as someone who doesn't actually know what you're talking about, but knows they should, and adding a lot of like, yes,
Nodding and sweating, but
collective,
also
yeah, like it's just Jordan Peele, just like full sweat. Yes, but of course, yes, by the witches, of course, yes, Shadowlands, there they are from. Yes. Covenant of Cricket, like just adding details that everyone kind of knows.
right, yeah.
But no, it's just full on Catch Me If You Can DiCaprio doctor being like, what do you think, doctor? And then the doctor's like, here's what we should do. And he's like, agreed, you passed. And the doctor's like, I nailed it. So he's just like really going along with it. Duncan, you see this. Do you try and clarify, or do you just let this ride?
I think he might add in that case just like an explanation that makes their case sound a little bit better. Or he's just like,
Makka was gifted this arm by the root folk, a race of trees who have become friends of Jassy and thus friends of the turtle.
Admittedly, you do recall that the root folk were doing a heavy trade with Bleen. So you see some nods of familiarity and acknowledgement. That said, looking at how many boats you saw on the way in, what might have seemed like, we know your friends, the root folk, now seems like, oh, we know a customer of yours. Shit.
yeah.
But you see some nods. But because I rolled a 4 and a 2. They kind of just let you have this arm. They can't really figure out what it is. They don't really have the expertise to correctly analyze it, and everything you said sounds incredibly made up and weird. So they eventually just kind of give up and are like, sure. And with that, you're taken in. So just mark that your gear is not on you. Imagine that you're kind of, again, wearing creature comforts, but you don't have all your cool stuff. You're taken to a joint cell. It's got 2 beds. Duncan, you kind of like testing the bed. It is so soft and you hate it. It is an unnecessary amount of like, it is a thick fucking, like it's like a foot thick and just like nothing but down. That said, as you see Makka kind of testing his, even though it's clearly not what he's accustomed to, you understand that sleeping with a shell on any kind of surface must be a real bitch. So they've clearly kind of gone out of their way to make accommodations for turtles. But
Tom,
for
is
you,
there a desk or something in the room?
yes. Yeah, we're talking Swedish prison. There's a desk. There's a lot of natural light. It's easy to work out in here. The toilet is like, discreet, but also clearly well kept.
It's got a bidet attachment.
Yeah, exactly.
If he flips the desk over and puts it on the bed and lays on it so it's like he has a shell, is the bed more comfortable?
The desk is unfortunately fastened to the wall and floor. So you go to lift it, and it's one of those classic like, whoop, and you just feel something twinge in your back that is never great. But after doing some quick stretches, you kind of work that kink out. But no, unfortunately, like again, you're and I think this all makes sense to Duncan. You're seeing where the limits are on the prison nature
hospitality of this prison.
Now, if you want to try and detach it, you can absolutely attempt that, because looking at the two of them, this does seem more like something you'd be comfortable sleeping on than the bed.
Yeah, no, he's definitely going to do that then. Like,
all right, give me a sleight of hand, please.
22.
Yeah, man. You get the sense that it's like attached in a way that's meant to be like, come on. It's like a lot of bike locks that are really just there to be like, come on, is it worth it? And then if you hit them with anything, they just shatter. And it's like, oh, well, you solved my bike puzzle. They're just a deterrent more than anything else. You quickly manage and effectively manage to get it free. You put it on the bed, you lie down on it. Oh, baby, that's what I'm talking about. It is much more to your liking. One of the guards walks by and just says, if you required a second desk, we would have just brought you one. Yes, please save the bolts. Bolts do not grow on trees. And then you hear like a scraping noise, and the guard comes back with another desk and like opens the door, like shoves it in, and then looks at you, points at the bolt holes, and says, don't grow on trees. Manufactured. Yes. And then close the door and lock it.
Well, Duncan's glad he got to keep the bolts, and he'll put those in his pocket in case they become useful later.
He's going to be so mad later when he comes by that desk can move.
Oh, wait. If he might come back and check it, Duncan will put 2 in. The one's by the wall so that it won't jiggle, but he gets to keep 2.
Great. Love it. You look at the lock of the door. It's made of bolts. Door opens and you're free. The two of you are in jail. Is there anything you two would confer about before the order of it? I misordered it earlier. You will be read the charges in court, and then you will be assigned your court-appointed representative.
Well, Makka, is there anything I need to know about the courts of Bleen?
I don't know how much Makka knows other than like just the broad strokes.
Even the broad strokes.
You're arrested and you go to court and you plead your case and you either go to jail or something else happens.
Yeah, because I think sort of out in the swamp where you lived, it would have kind of been like in feudal times when it's like, oh, if you're going to court, like we're going to take you to the city. That's where the court is. So you're aware of it in a very distant land of Oz kind of way. Yeah. But beyond that, you're not too certain. I will say, Ryan, the warden would have explained that essentially, like, you'll be taken to court. The charges against you will be read. You'll be able to enter a plea. After that, you'll be assigned a representative who will kind of talk you through the rest of the process. But you wouldn't enter your play at this point. My apologies. You're just going to be read the charges. So
charges, representative, then.
Yes, because basically it's like nothing is going to happen at court before you have a lawyer. So you're just going to find out the lay of the land, and then you can plan your strategy from there. But in terms of like planning, I just want you to know for Duncan's sake that Duncan doesn't need to be worried like, oh, we're going to show up and they're going to be like, you're guilty. It's treason. I'm hanging you today.
No, he's waiting for more info. This isn't like we need to escape mode, I think, at this point.
Yes, certainly not. And again, there seems to be a lot of interesting things happening all at once. From your observations to date, Ginkgo was taking you in under the "you fucked up my orgy room" thing and impersonating an ambassador. However, once Makka Deathcap was recognized, the entire tone seems to have changed and something larger seems to be at work. That said, confusion and miscommunication is the ally of a sneaky duelist trying to get out of criminal charges. So there is a little bit of, you've observed some confusion, which will work to your benefit.
Great. Makka, if you don't know anything about the court, then this is going to be kind of antithetical to you. But when we go to court and they read the charges, don't say whether you did or did not do any part of it. What you need to do is not talk. Because if they're like, you committed treason, and you're like, I didn't do that. And they're like, by teaming up with the princess, and you're like, I did do that, then we're fucked. So don't comment. We can talk about what we did and didn't do once we've got a lawyer separate. Like once they give us the defender and they put us in a room, just us, where no one can hear, then we can talk totally honestly. But until then, we just have to stay quiet. They say what they want to say, and we just stay quiet. Can you do that?
Makka says nothing.
There he is.
Great. You're doing great. You're doing great.
And then I think they both just sit silently. Because if it's worked thus far, Duncan does not want to confuse the system any further, so it'll just be silent waiting. And then he'll take out his dice, because I feel like they'd leave him his dice probably of his personal effects, and just be like, shake him in his hand, and then kind of give one of those shrugs like, hey, should we play dice?
Makka will point at them and say,
Those are called dice.
Oh, fuck.
This episode of Curse Code and Crowd Sound was mixed and edited by Laura Hamstra, and the campaign was created by Tom McGee. Our original theme music was composed by Landon Knoblock, and Curse Code and Crown's logo was created by the brilliant Decapitated Markers. If you want to follow our players or our DM on Twitter, you can reach out to Laura at EL Hamstring, Ryan at the Ryan LaPlante, Tyler at Tyler_Hewitt, Tom McGee at McGeeTD, or you can message our whole company at Dum Dum Dice. So please join us again for more Curse, Code, and Crown!
Dum Dums and Dice has to give a special thank you to the supreme beings of our Patreon at this time: Christian Menicola, Long, the Half-Blind Prophet, James Cuellar, Charles Grams, Christopher Little, Sue One, George Dolby, One True Artistry, Orion Birchfield, Lord of Bradovic, Noel Lewis, Scott Garland, Anthony Griffin, Chet Awesome Laser, Jordan Neesmith, Benjamin V, Gavin and Abby McDonald, Taryn Hefner, Cade Peters, Richard Cranium, Christian Mendez, Anna Zed, Eric Williams, Logan, Fire Unfriendly, Great Dane, Acrix, and Jill and Noel LaPlante. If you want your name to be added to this list, you can join our Patreon too at patreon.com/dumdumdice. Thanks to them, and a little bit of thanks to you.